There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Q&A session, which we're trying to do every week now, although I know our times are a little variable. I am Scott.
And I'm Chris with Hi-Lux, and thank you guys for joining us.
So today we got a slate of just 4 questions, 3 of which are pretty simple, and one which is has already generated a fair amount of discussion. We'll see how much carries over here. First question, will adding the 10 power booster change the head position on this new 6 power Gen 2 parallax adjusting scope? Now, I will say at the onset, I have read through the rules, and as far as I can see, YouTube will allow us to actually touch optics while on a live stream because it is not attached to a firearm. If I'm wrong, we're going to learn pretty quickly, but let's see what we can answer here. I'll have Chris demonstrate by putting this up to his eye. Then we're just going to take a measurement and see where we go.
Yep. And so to preface this, when we did the optical design, we did compensate and tried to keep the eye relief constant, regardless of the magnification of the eyepiece. And now, let's see, so theoretically it should be the same, but let's see in practice. So this is the 10x booster eyepiece.
And I'm going to index off of not the end of the eyepiece because the lengths are different, but instead off of the reticle frame.
So there we go. Get about the full sight picture right here.
Line it up off the front of your eyeball. Okay. So I'm reading about 6.5 inches there on that particular setup.
Let me just change the eyepiece.
This is not a very precise measurement. We don't have him in a fixed position. We don't have him in a lead sled. So this is just kind of eyeballing it, pun intended. Oh, thank you, VA Jake. Is that how you pronounce your name? I'm sorry, there are a lot of threads on these eyepieces.
They're very fine. Just bear with me 1 second.
So this one that he's putting on now is the standard 6 power. The shorter one that you saw was the 10 power. And they're marked on the eyepiece itself, not on the scope.
All right, let's check the eye relief on this one. So about right there.
So I got about a 1/4 of an inch difference.
So it should be pretty negligible. We have enough length on the sunshade where 1/4 inch won't really matter that much. So
yeah, end of the day, if you really need to, the lock ring that goes on the sunshade, just loosen those 3 set screws, pop it back. But personally, I don't know that I would really notice a 1/4 inch difference.
And when we did take this into the field, and when we were testing the 10x booster, I didn't really notice that big of a difference in my cheek weld or head position.
Yeah, I shoot with both of them, but I mean, I stick with the classic 6 power. That was the most common historically, and that's been fine going out to 1,000 yards. So I do need to shoot that 10 power more often.
And this 10x booster, the production, like the glass is just a lot better than the prototypes we're looking at. So
oh my god, yes.
let me just move this off.
We went through a few different prototypes. So Chris is one of the designers and the engineers. We both do testing. But essentially, at the end of the day, he builds something and I try to creatively break it. And we did damage some equipment in the course of testing those scopes, which is fun, as sad as it is to see.
All in the name of science.
That's what you want to call it. All right, question number 2. Did your Golden Boy already have drilled and tapped holes for the scope? My 2008 model does not. My barrel is octagon. This fella is asking a question in particular about the Henry Golden Boy mount for the Malcolm short scopes. I will say those scopes do not actually use the holes in the barrel to mount up. So ours does have holes. His apparently does not. In either case, it's not going to matter. What matters is the iron sight at the rear. And there should be an iron sight between the receiver and that first golden band. And you just got to knock that out. You put the dovetail in, drop the bar on top of the octagonal barrel. So the barrel shape is correct. The holes don't matter. It should be just fine to mount that up.
Now, I will say there is a lot of, I guess, variations on the nomenclature. A lot of people refer to a Golden Boy when it's actually a big boy, or maybe it would have been Henry. Back then, they referred to the big boys as Golden Boys as well.
And there's also the Yellow Boy.
And the Yellow Boy, yeah. In this case, when we say Golden Boy, it's the rimfire model. So the 22 LR, the 22 mag, and the 17 HMR version.
Is that their H004?
H004
Yeah,
specifically.
so, okay.
That variant.
Yeah. And whatever letter comes after that, as long as it starts with H004, that's exactly what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Now, question 3, this was just a fun one, the way this guy wrote it. The scope moves. That really scratched my brain compared to modern conventional ideas. Now this, I'm going to get close to the camera to show you, before I explain this, why it needs to move. This, you got to tell me if I'm in focus here.
Out of focus still. A little, yeah, there we go. So
this, as strange as it may sound, is a reticle made for one of these old scopes with literally my own hair. Now, scopes back in the day, they didn't have the fancy materials. They didn't have metal wires that were, thin enough to actually be usable. So reticles were made out of either spider silk, the best spider silk being that of the Black Widow, human hair, or horse hair. I didn't have any horses, and I hate Black Widows, so this is what we're working with. And this material is actually rather brittle, especially over time. In the desert, Wild West air, it just kind of dries out and becomes very responsive to recoil. So scopes were built to slide with something called a Pope rib, named after the guy who designed it, Mr. Pope, in order to just let the scope hang out. When the rifle recoils, the rifle moves back, the rings move back, and the scope just kind of ignores it. It looks like the scope's moving forward. That's actually the opposite of what's happening. But regardless of how exactly it's happening, at the end of the day, the effort is to mitigate any sort of recoil felt by the reticle as well as the glass. Nowadays, our glass is fixed in place real darn well. You'd be hard-pressed to get it to move. Back then, they had paper washers, they had glue made out of tree sap, they had a lot of stuff that was not as survivable as modern materials can be. So yes, the scope is meant to move, and that is actually a good sign. If your scope stays completely still, it could be pointing to a potential problem there.
Yep. And another talking point is some people ask us if our Gen 2 short scopes or the parallax adjustable short scopes, if those can be designed not to slide, or if you can adjust it so it doesn't slide. And the short answer is yes. Basically, if you mount it on your rifle and you don't leave any space behind the front ring, so this, let me get out of frame so it focuses. Still out of focus. There we go, right there. Yep, so if you mount it in this position where the front ring is touching the back of the, the sliding ring with the rib is touching the back of the front ring, the scope is not going to slide forward anymore because there's nowhere on the rib that it can travel. This is only recommended for lighter calibers, like if you're shooting rimfire 22, that's totally fine. Maybe up to a 30-30, but I'd say any centerfire cartridges, you definitely do want it to slide.
Yeah, out of my own testing, 30-30 out of an extremely lightweight rifle, like a very toned down Winchester 94 with a hunting load 30-30, you could potentially make that scoot if it's a little bit loose. And over time, that sort of shake and bump is going to move your mounts a little bit and loosen up the screws. Mm-hmm. So that really is the edge of when you can set this up not to slide. I'd recommend set it up to slide, even if you're shooting 22. The recoil of a 22 is pretty much not going to make it move, so you can still just kind of ignore it. But yeah, I'd say sliding is good, and try not to stop it from sliding. Mm-hmm. Now, last question. I'm going to throw this one at you because you are much better at handguns than me. And this is regarding the red dot on a Glock, one of the videos we posted. If I'm zeroed at 10 yards, that's great if all my threats are at 10 yards. Where do I aim if the threat is at 5 or 20 yards? Do I compensate by moving the dot off target, or will these differences in distance still yield an acceptable grouping?
Yeah, so for this, basically, it comes down to the ballistics of your zero. I choose to use a 10-yard zero just because for max point blank range for like a 3-inch group, you could pretty much hold center of mass and still hit what you're trying to hit within a 3-inch circle. You could use a 25-yard zero as well. I think max point blank range for that is around 75 yards. But at the end of the day, it comes down to just familiarizing yourself with your gun and your offsets. So the optic is mounted higher than the bore line. And when you're shooting those shots, let's say for the question, if you're sighting at 10 yards and you're at 5 yards, you're going to be impacting low because of just the offset. Physically, the barrel is lower than the sight. So you're going to need to hold higher, but you don't need to hold off the target. You just need to hold maybe an inch higher than where you want to hit, and you'll be good. Same thing at 20 yards. If you're sighted in at 10 yards, you're going to need to hold a little bit higher, but I would say go to the range, set up targets at all the distances that you think you're going to be engaging threats at, and just know what your groups look like.
At the end of the day, he's talking about holding off an inch, inch and a half. I think in a tense situation, let's call it, I don't know that I'm going to be able to precisely pick out a button on a shirt and aim for that. The target's going to be having a bad day. Mm-hmm. Whether you're an inch off, an inch and a half off, it's not good. So you definitely don't have to hold off target. If your target's here and you're aiming over there, you're not going to hit the target. Mm-hmm. As long as you keep focused on 10 yards, 5, 20, it's going to hit something.
Yeah. I'd say, and I'm curious, what distances, if you guys run a red dot, what distances do you sight in at?
Let's say specifically on a handgun, 9mm.
9mm.
The last part of the question I do want to touch on, will these differences in distance still yield an acceptable grouping? I know it may seem an odd bit of semantics, but I really got to harp on the fact that a grouping is entirely determined by the shooter and the precision of his firearm. So as distance increases, it's definitely hard to keep your group tight because that cone of probability does extend outward. But if everything is humming along fine, if you and the firearm are working together, that grouping should stay proportional at all the distances you reach out to.
Mm-hmm. And just let's do an example real quick. I pulled up some ballistics for a 10-yard and a 25-yard zero. So two different zeros using 9mm, 124 grain FMJs at 1,100 feet per second. Let's just look at 20 yards with a 10-yard zero. Let's say you're in the heat of the moment. You're just holding dead center. Your impacts will go 1.2 inches high from where you're aiming. So not a whole lot, just about like yay high. Let's see, for 25 yards, 25 yards, you're going to be about a 1/4 inch low. So whatever zeroing distance you use, I mean, both will still hit the mark. Whatever zeroing distance you use, I guess just train and know what your group sizes are at the different distances, and you'll be good.
So I think that about covers it for this week. Haas VM4.
Those are nice machines.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we have the VF4, but the VM4, I think, is for tool and die making. I think it has faster tool changes. I'm not sure, but yeah, they're very solid machines.
Sorry, when I saw Haas, my mind immediately first went to avocados. So I don't know. Anyway, I think that about does it for this week. So if you have any other questions, y'all, please feel free to drop them on this video, comments, give us a call, whatever you feel like doing. Any last words from you?
And yeah, if you have any questions, just comment below, and we'll see you guys next week.
Take it easy out there, and let's see if we can end this thing.